Welcome to the Clutch Burners Podcast, your place for stick shift talk, stick shift tech, and awesome stick shift guests. And tonight we have kind of a special, this is a special podcast because
Special guest.
my co-host tonight is actually the man behind the scenes, Mr. Stick Shift Nation himself, Mr. Travis Foster.
Hello, hello.
And Travis, who's our famous guest tonight?
Oh, tonight we have, you may have heard of him, the Canadian Chuck Norris himself, Richard Guido. He has what I would say is one of the most impressive drag and drive cars of all time.
On the planet? On the planet Earth?
On the planet. First of all, it's a stick car, and second of all, he drives it every single day, and third of all, he drove from freaking Canada to Florida multiple times in the snow, just to win a couple helmets. So he's top of my list for sure.
So you're talking about Richard Guido, the guy that won 2 6-week stick classes back to back, won Miles of Mayhem at least once, maybe twice,
Just
has
once.
has placed how many times in Rocky Mountain Race Week? Why don't we ask him? Rich?
Well, thanks for the intro, fellas. Um, I'll answer your question first. So I was writing them down. So I've got three first place finishes, two at Sick Week, one at Miles of Mayhem, and and I won the shootout at Drag Week in 2017. Then I got three second places. The first one was the first Drag and Drive event, was big block street race, naturally aspirated. The car was stick back then too, running 1050s. So I got a second at Drag Week. And then the other 2 seconds, I think 2018 was behind you, Bill. I think you got first that year in 2018 at Rocky Mountain Race Week.
Yep.
And then, I got second at Race Week in 2022 behind Cletus and Chad.
And
Ahead of you.
you know that those second places, we can reclassify those as firsts because those are your first place loser, right?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of first place.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Which of those do you think would be like your number one? When all those people walk into your trophy room, what do you show them first?
Oh, I can answer that. Can I answer first?
Yeah, go ahead.
I bet it's your black belt.
I don't have my black belt hanging on the wall, but yes, that is definitely, it took like 13 years to get. So actually it was about 10 years to get, but yeah, it takes a long time to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu. But no, I would say the Sick Week win last year. I think that was the biggest accomplishment. Lots of risk involved, lots of adventure involved driving that far. And then to win when you really don't know who's going to show up, and that's why you show up, is because you don't know who's going to be there. Yeah, I would say that was my biggest win. And then, I mean, to do it again this year was crazy. Did not expect it. There was three guys that I figured for sure one of them was going to finish, but
With a 7-second average, probably, right? Because we talked about this quite a bit before you left.
oh man, I think it's Jeremy Howell. I think he had run 720s, but he hurt his on the dyno before. So I think that's how I think he ended up with some water in his engine. So unfortunately, he didn't even make it to day one. Taylor went 849 on day one. And then I think when he went to make another pass, he ended up hydrolocking the motor, or it ended up getting water while it was off. So he didn't actually hurt it while he was driving down the track, but he heard it while he was driving down the track, but didn't blow it up or anything. So he didn't make race day. And then I think we all probably saw Chad went 757 at like 196 miles an hour on day one. And then day two, he went 801, I think. And day two was a bit of a mess. So I figured for sure he was going to bail out of the line and call it good. He didn't. And he went back up and he ended up blowing a hole about that big in the side of his transmission.
Didn't the whole back of it come off?
Yeah, where the magnets are, if you've ever had one of those apart, the whole magnet and bearing support, yeah, it was all on the ground. So
Yeah, that's
the bottom of his red car looks like a Smurf. It looks like he hit a Smurf doing 190.
oh, so like like Jonathan Atkins, he's painting the bottom of it Ford blue.
Yes, yeah,
They do that on purpose, so it's easy to clean up. I hear.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. It's
I like
got
the color.
ceramic in that oil, so it's ceramic undercoating.
Ooh,
There you go.
Good point. Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, that's good stuff.
But yeah, obviously this year was pretty epic too. Knowing those guys were coming, I would have been happy with being on the podium at all, but to survive it and perform like the car did this week was, yeah, it was probably the cleanest event that I've done. One and done every day. The only two mistakes I made were letting off too early at Orlando on, I would say on the first day, race day. And I was analyzing data and thinking I needed a different gear ratio, and these radials aren't growing, and I was totally overanalyzing it. And then I heard some guys talking about, yeah, a lot of people let off early at Orlando because of where the boards are. And I'm like, not me. And I checked the data log. Sure shit. It was like 840 into the run. I let off and coasted to an 891. So it should have been an 880 pass.
No,
870 pass maybe, but
869.
No, don't think so. That would have been day 2 of Bradenton. That should have been if I was going to make I need to beat Bill pass, I should have done it that day. But
well, Bill wasn't there, so you beat him every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's reiterate that a little bit. So Bill, you've been an 870 at what mile an hour?
At 165, like 164.95. So we'll call it 165.
Okay, and Rich, you've been what?
So my best pass ET wise was at Bradenton was 875. Now that was at 162 miles an hour because I didn't have it turned up as much, but the car has been 165 miles an hour. But
okay, and you two have been running together for years. I mean, what has the battle been back and forth? So I mean, there was a time where you were naturally aspirated, right, Bill?
Rich too.
Both of us.
So
yeah,
when I first met him at Drag Week 2013 was my first drag and drive, and I was totally inexperienced. I had 26-inch tall slicks that fit in my trunk and a single toolbox and a suitcase, and that was it.
Yes, he did.
And I was 100% unprepared.
Yeah, and that was my first year as well, and I was going 1050s actually with this same motor, naturally aspirated, with a TKO 600, same as Bill was running.
Nice.
Yeah, and I had a naturally aspirated Cleveland motor in my car, and the drop in elevation, the car went 1160s, and I felt like it was top of the world. That's the fastest I'd ever been. It just felt so exciting. And then I met these guys, and yeah, Rich's car was badass. It still is, but he was running in the 10s on an NA setup, and I was driving behind him, and the whole time I'm like, Jesus, like that dude can't shift, or something is broken, because every time he'd be bang, bang, because he had a faceplated transmission, and I talked to him about it, and he explained it to me, and because I had no idea, like that was the first time I'd had a stick in my car, and yeah, that was the beginning of a lot of really poor financial decisions.
So, for those that don't know, should we just dive into Rich a little bit? Like, just in general, Rich, like, what do you do? What's your family like? Where do you live? What's your credit card number?
Birth date, mother's maiden name, all that stuff.
Yeah. So I live in Red Deer, Alberta now. Been here for 25 years. I was a shift worker for 23 years. So I was worked at the oil sands, went to tech school for a couple of years. And in Canada, in order to operate petrochemical plants, you need to have a steam ticket. So I went to school for a couple of years, got my third class steam ticket. And then, worked at a petrochemical plant sync-crewed up at the oil sands for 8 years. The day my son was born was the day I got an interview or a call for an interview down at Nova. And
Big day.
yeah, and that was, we kind of talked about, we didn't want to raise our kids in Fort McMurray. We wanted to raise them in preferably like Red Deer, because I was trying to get into this plant here. And the day my son was born was the day I got the call. So that worked out pretty good.
So is it safe to say when you say your car's really making steam, it has a lot more meaning for you?
Yes,
because you have a steam ticket, right?
I'm a power engineer for a reason. That's right.
I love it.
So anyways, I've been working at a petrochemical plant. We make plastic pellets here. I was on shift for 15 years, and now I'm a leader responsible for a plant that makes 7 million pounds of plastic pellets every 24 hours. God, so about 2.4 billion pounds a year. It's a great company to work for. I've done it. Like I said, this is my 25th year. I'm very fortunate that I get lots of vacation because I've been here a long time. That's how I can do so many drag and drive events. I've been married to my wife, Sylvie, for, let's see, my son's 25, so like 27 years.
I'm glad you didn't say 22.
Yeah. And my kids are 25 and 23. Braden's 25 and my daughter's 23.
That's awesome.
So did either of them catch the car bug?
So I bought a 78 Trans Am T-roof 4-speed car.
Gold.
And when we went and put a windshield in it and stuff, my son ended up driving it back from the window place, and he came back from there so pumped. Like he was so entertained by the amount of people checking the car out and looking at him and kind of going like, "It looks like he's a baby driving that thing." So he likes cars, but he's been busy with other stuff. So, as the years get on, maybe my son will hop in the passenger seat one of these days. It'll be pretty cool to do lots with my dad, and then get my son out there too. So both of them are in the garage lots. My daughter's used the plasma cutter and done some welding, and but they're definitely a little more artsy than I am. Both, my son's a stage manager, and my daughter just graduated university in art school. So
one of the things to add is, and I think this is so cool, and I want to make sure people know this, like, who's your co-pilot for both Sick Weeks and other events? And this is what I think is just so great.
Yeah, so my dad, I think the very first year we went, 2013, he rode with, he actually rode with my brother in the Mustang. And that's when you met him, Bill. And my engine builder rode with me that year. But my dad has probably been on, 3/4 of the drag and drive events. He's been my passenger. So
that's so cool.
He loves it. You learn a lot too when you're spending that much time with your dad. And as you get older, you realize a lot of things about, if you tell your dad just to sit there and, you think he's on vacation and you treat him like, you just stay over there and I'll get this done. As much as it feels like you're trying to treat him with, you're on vacation, man, take it easy. You also disempower them, and it doesn't make you feel like you're part of the team. And so, we've had a few good battles over the years, but as I've matured a little bit, not a lot, I realized that if you make them part of the team and you give them jobs to do, and it makes them feel like they're part of the win too. Well, they are. Now I work them like a rented mule at 80 years old.
Yeah, and with you, there's no shortage of work. So if anybody if anybody has not had the pleasure of seeing Rich at a drag and drive event, or even just at the pit, what do you call it? The yard sale or the garage sale?
Yes,
Pretty
yes.
much yard sale, yeah.
His car looks he has disassembled just about everything and scattered it out like those diagrams that they show a car completely blown
The
up.
blown up, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's exactly what it looks like.
When he
So
brings a giant, I think it's like what is it, Rich? A 28 by 48 tarp, and he spread
Quite
everything
right.
out on.
Yeah. Yeah, I've come back. I think I can't remember which race week that was, where Adam Dory had made up signs for garage sale, and there's people like rummaging through my stuff, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
we stole that sign from a hotel. It was one of those wet floor signs, the yellow ones. Yeah, that's what it was.
yeah,
it was pretty awesome. Yeah,
and
Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't matter. No matter how much I try to stay organized when I unload the trunk, it always ends up being a yard sale. So I've just kind of given into it now. Just
yeah, and I mean, your co-pilot at a drag and drive event, anybody's co-pilot is extremely important. I mean, just the little things help so much that you don't even realize until you do it. But most people are like, "Hey, would you go, grab us something to drink really quick?" But Rich is like, "Hey, would you take out the passenger seat of my car real quick?" Those type of tasks.
Yeah.
Or, "Hey, would you change the transmission real quick? We got to get back on the road." So
Yeah, Travis, you're right. Like, and I think Rich would agree. Like, you don't just take anybody that'll go with you to be a co-pilot. Like, I've posted a couple times, a couple of years, where I needed a co-pilot, and I try to be a little funny about it. But in all seriousness, like, they need to be somewhat familiar with the software that you're running for the computer. In my case, Holly. They gotta like change. They just need to have some knowledge around what we're doing.
yeah.
Because they've got to be able to execute a checklist to get the car turned over, and you have to trust them. You can't
They have
go
to
back
know
and
their
check
cardinal directions.
stuff. Well, they have to navigate. You're driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that
and I
yeah,
prefer
it
if
is.
they
It's
don't
so
snore.
true. Like,
Yeah, if they don't snore at night, that's always preferable.
oh no, you just prepare and always bring earplugs if you're on guy trips. That's just a rule, man. That's for me, anyways.
Yeah,
Because those precious few hours you get, you better get some. So,
that's right. That's
but yeah,
right.
my dad, his job when we get to the track is literally empty out the inside of the car, take his seat out of the car, because it's all about being lightweight with me, and then
2,100 pounds.
yeah, he changes all four tires typically. I'll usually help him with the rear winters because they're a little heavy. But other than that, that's his job. That's what he does. And when he's done his job, he goes and sits down then, and he's like, "My job's done."
Yeah. And he's great to talk to.
Yeah.
Did he get you into cars?
So he was, we lived on the Queen Charlotte Islands for a couple of years, and he restored a Jeep when I was probably about 10 years old. But then when we moved back to Wycliffe, BC, we farmed. So we farmed for many years. But, in farming, there's so much mechanical equipment. So we were, gearheads almost by design because we had to fix equipment, and we never took tractors into anywhere to get fixed. We did it all ourselves. So he got us into being mechanical for sure. And then right around when we were starting to go off to school, he bought an AC Cobra kit car and built that. And that was a pretty wild machine. And then both my brother and I, we just kept playing with cars. And so he never really raced them like we did. But he definitely, he's always been a gearhead. Even when he was growing up, he messed with all kinds of cars and got in all kinds of trouble.
So I've met your brother Bob, and I want to talk a little bit about him too. But Bob put together like an album or something for your dad, and I don't recall, but how many cars has he built or restored over the years? I mean, it's like a staggering amount.
Oh yeah, it's countless. Like there was years he would do 2 or 3 cars since he retired. So he retired at 55 from the airport, and yeah, ever since then, he's just been working on cars. Just built a 30 by 50 shop with his own bare hands. It's crazy how much he did. And that just reminded me, even at 80, he's fully capable. So make sure I work him hard while he comes on these trips.
Hmm.
But countless, I can't even count all the cars that he's done. And he built the shop so he can finish the 36 Ford Coupe he's working on now. So he's not done yet, and he's got lots more to do.
I mean, I seem to think that number was in the 40s or 50s. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even think you guys could even remember them all.
Yeah, we struggle to go back and make sure we're trying to find some pictures so that we can sort of keep track, but we've done a bad job. He's hard at 80, he's still hard to keep up with. So
Yeah, that's impressive. So tell us about your brother Bob, because he's
Yeah,
done
so
some
Bob-
drag and drives too, and he's wrecked some stuff for sure.
yeah, Bob's had some rough luck at drag and drive events. Like I've been very fortunate. He's not so much. So the first year we met Bill there, my brother hit both walls at Indy. We did. I bug him because Brandon from Hot Rod Magazine had wrote an article day one while I was in Tech Line and released it day one. And so I was getting a little bit of media exposure. Well, my brother solved that on, I think it was day 3. So he bounced off both walls. I actually went down the track first and was back in staging because it wasn't a very good pass when this guy in this coupe comes beside me, and he's just visibly like rattling, and my phone's dinging away, and I'm like, what the heck's going on here? And the guy says, man, guy in a Mustang just went right in front of me and crashed into the wall. And I'm like, what? And I looked at my phone, and there was all kinds of people messaging me, is my Bob okay? And so yeah, he hit both walls on his first drag and drive event. That's where we met Mike Finnegan. He stayed and helped us.
Mm-hmm.
We got Bob's car all together in sort of running form, and he actually completed it, and he won Spirit of the event that year. And that was a pretty rough year. I
I
mean,
would
we
call
ended
that
up cruising with
the
Dave.
Guido way. That's the Guido
Yeah.
way.
That's the
got to
Guido way,
rewind.
yeah.
You got to rewind and tell about just the drive down to there, because
Oh.
it begun like 10 miles from your house, right?
Yeah, we literally drove 3 hours. We were still in Alberta, and my brother pulls over, and we're just south of Lethbridge, and he's like, the thing's not running anymore, and turns out he stripped the gears on the camshaft to drive the distributor, and so the oil pump was still turning, and it pretty much came to a stop. It was very weird that he had a camshaft with him. So he told us later that he was under there and was checking something out and noticed that maybe there was something going on. So we changed the camshaft on the side of the road before we had ever left Alberta, and that was the beginning of the trip. So, and same thing. I've never trailered to any drag and drive event, so that was Bob. That was Bob's first year too. He wasn't trailering; we were driving, and we both just had our cars. We didn't have trailers behind us either. But yeah, that was the first one. And then the second one, and this is the one that's taught me some lessons. He finished the whole event, and he wanted to go up and make another pass. There was no money in it. He didn't have a chance of placing, but he just wanted to go up and make another hit. He went up and make another hit, and he took the rods out of it. And so he ended up buying a truck from Jason.
That's right, Jason Lang.
Jason Lang.
He was my co-pilot at the time. And what did he call the truck? He had a nickname for the truck.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but he bought it for $1,000 off Jason, rented a U-Haul, and drove the thing all the way back to Montana, and then left the truck there and sold it later. So that was my brother's second drag and drive event, and that was Drag Week as well. And then I don't know, he's been with Pat Miker a bunch, been a passenger quite a few times. He's done Miles of Mayhem up in Canada.
I think the truck was called the Gambler, wasn't it?
Is that what it was? Yeah, probably.
I think it was the gambler.
And the crazy part is when we got to Montana, he had been following me all the way home. So I don't need to tell you the speeds. But when we got to Montana, the tires on that truck had like bulges on the side of them, and it was like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have been doing 80 across the country, but yeah.
Oh well. What's
Oh well.
what's funny is a lot of you would probably recognize Pat Miker's car. It's a super clean pro-charged Chevelle with a Lenco in it.
Big tire car.
Yeah, and the first time I ever met Bob, I think we were at the Burnout Box at Great Lakes, and it's like uphill, and so Pat goes up to do a burnout, and something breaks. I don't recall what it is. I think it's like something on a shifter linkage. And so he like rolls back, and Bob, is he almost your age probably?
He's 2 years old.
2 years older than you. This guy sprints across, jumps the fence, goes to their pits, grabs something, comes back, jumps the fence again, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. He's a Guido. It's like you guys don't know how to quit. None of you all have this like bold determination where you just like are just gonna do it. I mean, and it's really fun to watch for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. Bob's definitely. He also road races his car. So he's done a couple of hill climb races. Unfortunately, the last one he did, I don't know, he got mixed up somewhere along the way, and it was supposed to be a hill climb, and he did a tree climb. And he ended up about 2 feet up a tree with the front nose of his car. So very unfortunate, but like normal, he'll get it fixed. We'll either find I think he's going to cut the front off of that one and redo it. But yeah, he's by no means given up. He's got a pretty busy family life right now, so that's keeping him pretty occupied. But he's going to move down to Red Deer soon, so that should cause all kinds of chaos down here as well.
Nice. So one of the things that I think, well, I've certainly learned a ton from you, good or bad, but but one of the things that I think is super interesting, especially for the drag and drive community, is literally the reliability and the things that you do to your car or for your car in process. So let's talk a little bit about the setup of your car, like what it is and the setup, but specifically, the biggest failure points in drag and drive from what I've seen, and I think kind of across the board, is valve train and fuel system. And you and I have both experienced some of those issues in years past, and I think we've both got them fairly well ironed out now. But talk about what you do, because I've learned so much from you from a valve train perspective. But talk about your setup and specifically valve train and what you do and how you make that live and work.
Yeah. So first, I'll talk about there's a few people who are thinking that, man, that guy's always successful. Like my first drag week, I had 2 transmissions. I broke the first one. I have like 5 broken cases of TKO 600s under my garage. So I'm not a really quick learner. I have broken quite a few parts. If I had to list all I think I broke 3 pinions off rear ends. I broke axles on my 12 bolt. So I have broken a lot of stuff. But through that, you try to learn and get better every time. So just a quick lineup of my car. So my car's always been heavy. I was gathering some info to answer some questions here. And I think at the one race week, it was 4,200 pounds when it was pro-charged. Like, it's always been heavy. And obviously with a stick car and being that heavy, it's hard on stuff. So it's 4,200 pounds. It's been, through quite a few iterations. The current one is, it's 521 cubes, Pontiac, with a 94 millimeter turbo. And the engine in 2013, when it was naturally aspirated, made about 716 horsepower. So you throw 15 pounds of boost at that, double atmosphere, you double the cubes, and now you got 1,400 horsepower. Yeehaw!
That's right. And as Adam Dorey says, it's 1,000 cubic inches.
All of a sudden, it's 1,000 cubes.
That's right.
Yeah. And currently, I have a Black Magic clutch in there, which is, man, it is saved the drivetrain. And then a G-Force 6-speed transmission with a 0.56 gear, 350 rear gear, 28-inch tall tires. And so actually my winter tires are about 29-inch. So 1,650 RPM is 80 miles an hour. I personally think that's one of the biggest keys for me, and the amount that I drive the car and the fact that I'm not beating everything up.
I would second that overdrive, which I switched to a 0.5 also. I don't know, it was last year, the year before, but for that same thing, because less RPM going down the road is less cycles on the engine, less cycles on the valve train, it's less wear and tear.
And you can hear what's going on with your car. Like I can hear if I've got detonation or something going on, I can hear it in my car, because it's, some people would say it's not that quiet. And, at 80 miles an hour in a 1965 GTO, it's a little bit of wind noise for some weird reason. I don't know why, but, and so, yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit about the camshaft. It's a comp cams. It's 700 lift. It's like 266 duration on the intake and like 268 on the exhaust. And it's solid roller. It's got 902 lifters, offset lifters, and then it's got Crowler shaft rockers on it. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay.
The offset lifter, again, we've talked about too, because if you didn't have that, you would not be running a solid. Is that correct?
I think I would go to a hydraulic if I could. It's honestly, like I said, it's a Crowler. They're Crowler lifters, and they're Crowler shaft rockers. And I think the 904, the bigger lifter, the less, the more load on a bigger surface rather than a smaller lifter. Because I had 842 like stock Pontiac style lifters for a while, and I had quite a few failures with them, solid and hydraulic. But since I went to these ones, I had Morales for a long time, and now I have Crowers, but I have had zero lifter. I've had one lifter failure, but I'm pretty sure it was because of some things that were going on with the rockers that beat it up. And so I think one of the things that makes me successful and that I get harassed about all the time is my hood's always open and I'm always checking shit and checking lash and keeping an eye on it and knowing your motor well enough to know when things are going bad is pretty key. Like I can, I think somebody timed me at the last event and it was like 17 minutes. Yeah, it was like 17 minutes to pull the valve covers off, check all the lash, make sure everything was good, put it back together, and have the thing running again. And you gotta know that stuff.
Yeah.
So let's dive. Sorry, Travis, go ahead.
One thing that I've noticed about you two is you're both very similar in how particular you are. So like Rich, I think you have you're so familiar with your car because you drive it every single day, and Bill, you come from the aircraft world where you have to be particular. So it is kind of interesting to see that there are some guys who are just kind of like send it guys, and you two are not really that way. You two know your stuff. You know what's going to happen before it happens. Like, oh, okay, I had this issue, and that's because I have neglected that part for the last 3 seasons or something like that. So I feel like a lot of people could learn a lot from you two just watching your routines, especially because you've been on so many events to this point.
Thank you, Travis.
Oh,
yeah, I think one of the keys is not introducing failure too. Like I think Devin is a good example of that. Where last year, he was going to do his first event and thought he would freshen up his motor, and in the process, something happened to his motor, that had been super reliable for him, and he thought, oh, I'm just going to freshen it up before the trip, and that got him in trouble. Much like me, I did have some new parts waiting for me in Florida, but I didn't put them on because a couple of issues. I think right now we're all experiencing a variety of quality of some of the parts that we're getting. So if it's working fine, putting on a new part because you think the other one is close to failure can get you in just as much trouble as waiting for it, keeping an eye on it, and then changing it when you actually see a problem. So I think that's pretty key too, is don't fix what isn't broken. Like don't.
So I'd like to back up just a little bit. I'd like you to dive in specifically to your valve train, because you've made some comments. I mean, you and I talk a lot, but you've made some comments on some other stuff that I want to reiterate here, specifically about valve train. Like you check it, but you're not constantly setting lash. And I want you to talk about that. And there's specific reasons why you don't, even if it's out a few thousand. So dive into that, because I think it's super interesting and worth saying again.
Yeah, and so it's specific for shaft rockers is how I would say, as compared to pedestal rockers. But on shaft rockers, when you adjust the lash, you turn the adjuster, and the adjuster is stationary, but the push rod always moves in the same place in the adjuster. So every time you adjust the adjuster, you are almost now putting it in a different spot. So if you've kind of wore in a bit of a groove, which, you might say, well, it shouldn't do that, but they do. When you give it a, another thou, try to tighten up a thou of clearance, now you're going to wear another groove into the adjuster. And pretty soon you just keep chasing lash. So that took me a while to figure it out, where it was like, yeah, don't chase it. So I literally have like a 5 thou and an 8 thou feeler gauge. And if it's in between there, I don't touch it. And what I realized by doing that is typically you don't have to touch it. And with an iron block and aluminum heads, stuff moves around a little bit. And the other thing I learned is where you think you're having a lifter that might be failing, typically it's up top, whether it's the shaft bearings, the adjuster wearing a bit, or the push rod ends going away on you. So to me, those are all things you check before you start ripping your engine apart, which I did and changed lifters once when I didn't need to because I was looking in the wrong place. But I learned that through the experience of drag and drive.
And I would agree with you. When I was running a solid cam, I did just like Papa Rich taught me. Just check. You're not always adjusting, but you're checking. And whenever I'd start to see lash go away, 9 times out of 10 or 9.5 times out of 10, it was a trunnion bearing. And I have shaft. You and I have the same stuff, the same Crowler valve train, which is awesome. But a trunnion bearing would start to go away, and so I have spare pairs of shafts with the rockers and everything, and I would just swap that out. But I also have spare trunnion bearings with me. I always carry those as well, which actually worked out really well for Royce one year. And that's how I met him, because we can get into that story another time. But it's always seems to be that. It's just one of those wear items. And I was running really aggressive valve train stuff at the time, and have since learned a lot again, but other people as well. And what I have now is way less aggressive, makes the same power, and now I don't have to mess with it. So.
Yeah, I mean, we had Ben Strader on the podcast here, but if I've learned anything from what the Spintron and all the information that he shared with us, is that, the old school methodology around huge valve spring pressure to keep the valves under control can get you in more trouble than it's worth. And it's not necessary. If you have a cam lobe that's designed properly, you're way better off with lower valve spring. The lowest you can get and still meet the RPM you want is where you want to be. Anything more than that is just wear and tear on parts.
And talk about what springs you running, double, single, how much pressure on the seat and open, like where are you at on yours? Because you have a lot of
so I'm running a P. What's that?
You have a lot of lift on your cam.
Yeah, it's like 706 lift. And so they're a max life PSI spring, so they're meant for a circle track, but I only have like 220 on the seat and about 520 open, and it sees 7,200 sometimes. Don't tell the engine builder, but and I've had zero issue with that. So and I've never broken a valve spring since going to this setup. But I'll probably change them like every 3 years. I'll just put on a new set, even if they're measuring the same. And I'm going to be a little bit more careful. I know Doc McIntyre and Jeff McConnell on this last sick week, they basically went to put the same valves on, and they were having all kinds of failures. So they ended up putting on the old valve springs that they had taken off to survive the week.
So when you say you're going to replace them every 3 years, that's actually every 60,000 miles, right?
Yeah. Yeah, when I look at how many miles I put on last year, like there was 4 events last year, so yeah, it gets quite a few miles. Yeah.
That's impressive as hell, Rich. Seriously.
Yeah.
That's just awesome. Yeah.
You drive your race car a lot more than some people drive their regular car.
That is,
well, and it is funny when you tell people it's 1,500 horsepower, they're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like,
yeah. Who's this joker? 1,500 horsepower, sure. Yeah,
right,
drive in the snow.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it was, this, last year with Kyle Williams from Boosted Lifestyle, with him in the back seat, when we got there was lots of people. And then to do it again this year, and you wouldn't believe how many people wanted to check out the ass of my GTO. I don't know. They went back there for some reason. They usually went back and looked at the license plate and went, this is the car from Alberta? You drove this thing? I should have wrote a mark every time I got asked that question, because my whole back window would have been full. Like, so many people are like, you drove it, like you didn't trailer it. It's like, nope.
There's not like a truck and trailer parked in the next town or something.
Yeah. Nope. You can talk to the border guards.
There was a whole documentation of you traveling this time, thanks to Blaine and a few other people, right? So, we have pretty solid video evidence that, you did make it. I can't believe it.
And I'll tell you, the first race week I actually did trailer my car there. I borrowed my brother's truck and I borrowed a trailer. And I'll tell you what, I had more problems with the truck and trailer than I did just driving it. And I got worse gas mileage. So it's just so much easier, especially if you have a sorted race week, drag week type trailer. Like, just like you, what do you get? Like 16, 17 miles a gallon pulling that thing at 80, 85?
Yeah, when you have a third passenger and you need that much more stuff, the car is heavier and everything, so it's probably closer to 15. But I would say it ranges 15 to 18 depending on which way the wind's blowing. Yeah. But the other part is it just makes the adventure that much longer. Like, when I think 2014 was one of the best years because everybody drove. Like, I had a whole bunch of people from Canada. We hooked up with you, Bill. Everybody had a stick car. And it was the best. Like, you're already doing all the fun stuff all the way. It's like, It's kind of like Power Tour in order to get to the event. Then you do drag week and then you do Power Tour all the way back home.
Totally.
Like, it's just,
totally.
It's
those of us that do the event, how long it's supposed to last, and then we go back home and we've done like a full week's worth of work. And then we look on Facebook and Rich is like almost home. You know what I mean? Like, man, I'm so jealous. His vacation lasted like 3 weeks.
It is true and that's part of the reason I do it. It's just so I want to spend as much time in the car as I can. And I was going to talk about the comfortable seats. Like, the last few years I've had Procore 1000s, and they're probably good for a road race type car. Like, they're lots of bolstering, but it kind of squishes you. And Ted might go, he's got Procore 1300s, and they look pretty much like a stock GTO or Fairlane seat. But they don't have the bolstering. And I tell you, man, they were fantastic this time. Like I drove 1,400 miles straight on Sunday/Monday to get home. And I didn't have a sore ass. It was awesome. They were awesome. They're good seats. I'm super happy with those.
Let's
That's
dive
awesome.
into that. So one thing that I've noticed talking to Drag and Drive guys is they always have some like tips or tricks or just their positioning for comfort. Like you have to drive 1,000 miles throughout the week. What's your position? Are you an arm out the window, hand on the wheel type of guy, or what are you doing?
I'm sure it's arm out the window in Canada when it's like 10 below.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
feeling the
it's a
snow
lot
and
like this.
sleet as you go by with your hand. Yeah.
Well, honestly, I think one of the things I have is an armrest for my right arm and I still have the armrest on my door.
Yeah,
So
that's called a
yeah,
shift,
I'm
not a hitch.
usually yeah, exactly. I can put my arm on there and then my hand on the shifter handle. But yeah, so I actually think an armrest is good because your arm hanging down for that long is kind of hard on a guy. But if you got armrests on both, it's like you're in a big lazy boy, just cruising down the road, man.
Do you have a
Well, and it's
radio in
on
your car?
auto. Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Is it cranked
And
up?
Bluetooth for his phone.
Yeah, and Bluetooth, and then yeah, when my passenger looks like this, then I'll usually put the headset on and drown out a little bit of the noise, and then I can just listen to podcasts or music or whatever I want. But
Nice.
yeah, and the taxi beads are another one that are pretty funny. People are like, "What the heck is with the taxi beads in the car?" But they actually seem to, yeah, they just give you a little bit of massage, keep you up off the vinyl. It's pretty good. Yeah, highly recommended, even in the winter in Canada.
Nice.
Oh, that's so cool. So let's see here. I talked to you so much, but I'm actually going to look at our list of questions
Oh,
that we wrote down.
one thing I definitely want to dive into is Bill. You mentioned like the two biggest things that people fight on drag and drives is their
Oh.
valve train and fuel. And so let's go into fuel because I know that you have made some changes over the years. So talk about what you're at now and what you have learned.
Yeah, because he's had some issues with fuel system for sure.
Yeah. So coming from a petrochemical plant background, I always like to have a backup for whatever. So my street fuel pump was sufficient enough that I could use it as a race pump if I had to. The problem with that is it was high volume enough and it actually had a recirc right at the pump to go back to the tank, but it still flowed enough fuel that it would go all the way up through the fuel rails, heat up, and come back, and eventually you'd end up with enough heat in the tank, when it was hot, or while you were in Colorado where water pretty much vaporizes because there's no pressure in there. And so more recently, I've actually switched over to a small little wall barrel pump from Summit. And it's strictly a drive pump, and I have had zero issues since I put that on. So I have I pretty much have a stock 65 GTO tank that I cut the bottom out of, create some baffling for fuel injection, because what you learn when you move over to fuel injection, if you hit the brakes and there's no fuel pressure, your car shuts off. So you can't have that with as compared to a carburetor where it'll just fill the bowls up, or you can use some what's in the bowl. But so I modified the stock tank so it looks like a normal 65 GTO tank except for a little sump. And then I have a 3-gallon race tank for C16. Both those tanks have their own pumps. Like I said, tiny little wall barrel that hardly flows anything, so it doesn't really recirc much back to the tank, doesn't heat it all up. And then I have a Fuel Lab high pressure, high flow pump that will feed, 15, 17. Actually, I think it'll feed about 1,800 horsepower. So both of them have discharge check valves. So when I want to switch over from race to pump, I just have an electrical switch. and it just switches which relay is going to get turned on. And so I don't have any valving on the supply side. Now on the return side, I just have a three-way valve. So I just swing it to whatever tank I'm going to. And I think I've done it once where I tried to turn my race tank into a balloon because I forgot to switch the three-way valve, and it's like, what's all this stuff coming out of the trunk? And the tank looked like a balloon back there. I was like, oh, yeah. So you only do that once.
That was a hot mix of C16 or a hot mix of pump gas after that, right?
Yeah. But it's very simple, and there isn't very much to switch back and forth. And I've talked about this before. The draining fuel for me is a hazard I don't want to deal with, and doing it this way it still gives me a backup if I have to run on my race fuel pump. I got 3 gallons of gas. It'll get me probably another 45 minutes or something. So it's still nice to have it that way because you still have a backup if you need it.
Yeah.
Have you fought your fuel diluting at all? Like being inconsistent or anything?
No, I've had zero issues with. Now my race tank is higher than my pump gas tank. So if any fuel is going to move, it's going to be race into pump. For the pump to get into the race, you would literally have to have a failed check valve, and you'd notice right away because the gas tank might look like a balloon.
So let me add to that, because that is something that I know Mark Cicino had an issue with, and who else? Tom Stark. They had an issue with that as well, and it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. But I think one of the main differences is with your setup and even mine, we're not actually pushing them that hard. I mean, you make how much boost do you make when you run like 870s?
Yeah, so this time I had it turned down a little bit, like it was 14 and a half pounds of boost.
Yeah, that's a whole different world than 38 pounds or 42 pounds of boost. Because if the fuel is not 100% C16, you might have an issue. But honestly, I mean, your setup, if you richened it up, it probably would make that power on pump gas, don't you think?
It would be close, especially with the air to water intercooler that's on it and how cool the air intake charge is. Like I'm probably cooler than what C16 wants.
Oh,
like at the end of a pass.
You're pretty cool.
Yeah. At the end of a pass, it's like 90 degrees. And I know C16 actually likes a little bit more heat. But I'd say I did learn something from Tom and Blaine. It might have actually been Blaine who explained it to me, is that when they were talking to the VP guy, he was saying it takes very little pump gas to wreck C16. And so I didn't, I figured, it's just a little bit of dilution. It really wouldn't have a big impact on the octane rating, but so I actually changed my strategy after chatting with Blaine and Tom about that. So now when I switch over, I hook up my laptop and I'll count to 10 or 15 seconds and flow through the whole system, take race gas, pump it all the way through into my pump gas, just to make sure that I don't have any issue. So that was a change for me. That I didn't used to do. What I used to do is cycle the key like 2 or 3 times. It'd be like, meh, meh, and that's all the purging I would do. But now I'm a little bit more cautious of it. Mm-hmm. There's one other thing I want to mention before I forgot. The other thing with driving so far is the amount that you can carbon up your car. And especially at 1,650 RPM or, anything under 2,000 RPM. So Matt Blasco has, really harped on me about using seafoam. And so this time before the last 3 tanks before I started racing, I put in a can of seafoam every time. And this time I had no flames underneath the car, no big pops. And I think it really was that seafoam kept the combustion chamber or cleaned it up before racing. So it's a pretty good tip if you if you drive for a long ways.
They need to send you a free case now, right?
Yeah, I could use a free case.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Huh.
on that fuel mixing, that always made me a bit nervous because I know that guys mix fuel intentionally, and I know a lot of them are pretty consistent with it, but it just seems like you could be off. It's like it just makes it seem much more consistent just to run it just like it is out of the pail or out of the barrel, whatever your fancy is. But mixing it has always just seemed not quite my forte.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So so let's talk. So we talked a lot about the driving piece, but let's talk about the racing piece. So what are your so you switched to radials this year,
Yep.
and I know certainly at Sick Week because those tracks are heavily radial prepped. Um, Talk about the difference from the year prior when you were running a regular bias ply slick versus the radial, because there were some issues. A lot of guys, actually, from what I understand, had issues with the bias tire on the Sick Week prep tracks.
Yeah, and I would say this year was the same. Like I know when the big tires went up after the radial tires, even though they tried to like calm the track down so the traction wasn't as it's tough, right? And so last year there was such good prep that the radial or the slick would just grab and you would literally wad it up so much and then run it over and blow the tire off. Like I did that quite a few times. My quickest pass was on the lowest RPM launch that I did last year, just because it didn't wad the tire up as much. It dead hooked, and had enough pressure that I could do a okay 60 foot, but nothing crazy. So yeah, on these flypaper tracks, you're better off racing what they're prepped for. And so the radial was a game changer this year. Like, I mean, just quickly, I made 6 passes. So people, my buddies are bugging me. You drove 3,000 miles to go a mile and a half. And I'm like, yeah, that's the math. Yeah. But yeah, I was one and done every pass. I never spun the tires once, never missed a gear change. And, I analyzed all the data, looked at my clutch data on the first pass and the last pass. I never adjusted the linkage on my clutch. I adjusted the clutch the same every day though. Cranked about 5 turns in for the street, and put like 2 little, probably like, I don't know, a third of a turn of base, and the radials seem to like hook every time. Now I have seen some video of my car where it's like I thought it was burning rich, and now it's like, well, that looks like a lot of clutch dust. So the clutch was doing some work for sure.
And let's make sure people understand you run 100% mechanical linkage on that.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's. Oh, go ahead, Travis.
So on the tire thing, thinking ahead to Sick Week, it made a lot of sense to switch to a radial, but thinking to like Rocky Mountain Race Week, and you're in Kearney, Nebraska, and it's always the hottest day of the year, and that track is super greasy. Are you still going to run a radial? Then are you going to switch, or are you stuck with the radial? What are your thoughts?
So, really, it's this podcast and Jonathan's answer to the same question. Now that I've ran these and see how well they worked, my car is so heavy that I'm pretty convinced I can make them work on a track with any sort of prep at all. I don't think they'll work on a no prep, like a really like bare asphalt type of situation, but I think if there's any prep at all, but we'll see if we can hopefully I won't make a liar out of myself this year, because our tracks around here are not prep the greatest. So I'll know before I come for race week whether or not these will work. But I actually think they will. Like, they're a phenomenal tire. I mean, I looked at a bunch of pictures. They were definitely hooking and doing work. But the data logs and everything, and how, like, I wasn't being real aggressive, and I said this a couple of times at the event. Like, I actually turned the launch down a bit to make sure I could get down all the tracks. So I think I could just turn it down more if I have to. If the prep's not as good, I'll just turn it down, slip the clutch more, and try to get the tire to hook that way. So it was a pretty good learning experience, this whole trip. Don't get me wrong, I would have loved to have turned it up and increased the boost quicker, so I could have went 869. But survival was absolutely the key this time. So now if Bill was there right on my heels, or if there was somebody else right on my heels, I absolutely would have turned it up. But there was, sorry, Frank, but I was like 7/10 ahead of Frank, and all the fast guys had broke, and now I am the fast guy. So my theory was I did not want to do the same thing as the other guys that were ahead of me.
Yeah. Speaking of that, it looks like there's somebody that's going to start running with you guys pretty soon. So what's the name of the guy that got third place at Sick Week?
CJ. Oh no, you're talking about Chris Hine.
Yes. So
Yes.
the last couple days, it seemed like he started to figure some things out and was starting to catch up. There on the last day, I think it was still mathematically possible for him to beat Frank, but I don't think he quite got it. But it looks like he's going to start running about the same times that you guys are, so that will be cool.
Well, and the other thing is I think Frank's going to be spraying it. He's been working really hard on getting the car sorted with the radial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And he got some kind of new setup on the motor, and he's going to be spraying it. And he's not far off from where we're at. And if he sprays a couple hundred horse on it, we might be seeing 50 taillights.
Yeah, so he's changed over to fuel injection is what the change was on his motor. Okay. And so he really is trying to understand that and figure that out and get that dialed in. And then I'm sure Mark Pacinio and some of those guys will help him. And I have no doubt he'll be able, like, that motor makes a ton of horsepower. So a little bit of spray, there'll be a bunch of us 850 guys, I'm going to call them, that we're all going to be right there. And so Chris, he's just got to get that bank shift Billy figured out, and he'll be right there. He went 891 at 150 miles an hour, and that's the first time he's been out with the twin turbo and a stick. So he's made some great progress. And so he'll be at Miles of Mayhem, and I think he's coming to Race Week too. And then Brent Stevens is another one. He's already been, I don't know if he's been like 565 in the 8th mile and like 871. Like he's right there too. At last year at Miles of Mayhem, he had a clutch failure, but same thing. He's coming to Miles of Mayhem and to Race Week. And then same with Ted. Ted's got a car, same kind of potential. He can be right there with us too. So this is cool. I hope there's a whole bunch of us, and all of a sudden the stick class is like an 850 class. Sorry, Chad, and all you 750 guys, but it's just cool. I just can't wait. I told Chris, I was like, man, I hope you're right there with me all week, and we're battling it out, because that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it fun when Bill and I are racing, because when you're one and done at every track, as cool as it is, like, I'm a racer, man. I wanna go make some more hits, but it's like, it does not make any sense to go and beat your car up more when you have a substantial lead and everybody that was faster than you is broke. So it kind of sucks on one, and then on the other one, it's like, yeah, well, you have to be happy with the car's performance, and I'm just super excited between this podcast and the amount of stick cars out there now. It's just going to be so cool to come to these events. And I'm actually surprised that Hot Rod Drag Week hasn't made a class for stick cars. They've kind of made the shootout official, but they still don't have a stick class, which I should really hit up the guys at Hot Rod and go, what are you guys doing? Like, why? We're people too.
And so you probably could call them up and they would pick up the phone. So why do you think you're such an influencer in the stick shift community? I mean, clearly you're on this podcast, which is awesome. I mean, not only you're a guest, but you're a co-host typically, so that's cool.
Wow.
But talk about that. I mean, like, when you go places, like, people swarm you. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, you guys did say that at the beginning, that there's not many people who do drag and drive like I do. And
Like
it's
none.
funny
There's no
even because
one.
that
No one. Let's be
yeah.
clear. You are the one.
um but there's all kinds of people like Chris Hine. He's like, as soon as I get mine sorted out, I'm not trailering at all anymore. They had trailer issues too. And um yeah, I don't know. I think people just think it's cool. My mentality is summer short in Canada. I want to drive that thing every day I can. I drive it to work, and people are like, they've watched some of the videos and they're like, I can't believe this thing is in the parking lot. And I'm like, it's just a car, man. It's the turbo makes it 1,500 horsepower, but it's as streetable as anything else. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's it's probably two pieces: doing what I do and actually being successful and not, failing a whole bunch of times. I mean, I do have failures for sure. I've been in accidents with the car, but the reality is you could be in the exact same accident at the event. So if you're that worried about it, don't bother coming. But in my mind, it's like, it's a car. You got to go out and have fun and enjoy yourself. And like Frank said, how many summers do you have left? So you got to get out and enjoy it. And I think it's so cool to be at a gas station, and so many people are just excited to see the car out. And I used to have one, except for it had 4 doors and a Hemi, but
Had one just like it.
just like yours. Yeah. But
Yep.
it is, even when you're driving down the highway and you get thumbs up, and it's lots of times it makes people's day. So I enjoy that aspect as much as actually driving and doing the events. So
That answers one of my questions that I had for you, which is like, what draws you to drag and drive over, if you did competitive heads up drag racing like Jonathan Atkins or Nick Coleman or things like that. And to you, that's what it is. It's just like the pulling up to the gas station with your buddies and chatting and things like that, right?
yeah, I have never wanted a race car. Like, it's always a street car first. And if it loses that capability, and so if I want to go and play with my car, I have to load it up, trailer it to a track, race for the day, hope I don't have any issues, and then load it back up and drive it. It's just, I would so much rather, and it is the best feeling driving up to the local racetrack, passing people on the highway in their race truck and trailer, kicking their butt at the track, going faster than them substantially sometimes in their 10-second race car, and then passing them on the way home because they lost early and I was still racing, and I passed them on the way home. And it's just, you have to enjoy the car enough to want to drive it. But in order to do that, I mean, I have power steering, I have hydro boost brakes. Other than knowing how to drive a faceplated transmission like Blaine, it's super streetable, and you can drive it everywhere and enjoy yourself.
So let me add to that, because Rich, you and I have had this conversation many times, and the conversation has been, God, maybe we should build a more competitive, lighter weight car. And every single time we come back to, well, okay, so we'll spend 6 figures and we'll have a car that's way less streetable and not as nice to drive on the street. And then it's like, for what? To go a half a second quicker and win $1,000? I mean, we make bad choices, but that doesn't sound like a good choice. And honestly, if you have your choice, driving something that's got an aluminum seat in it and it breaks your back to drive it on the street, why would you? Unless you're doing a drag and drive. Like your car, you talked about the super comfy seats. I got bench seats in mine. It's like they're bolstered a little bit, but man, it's pretty comfortable.
Yeah, and if you want to take your buddy out for a spin, or your brother-in-law or your brother and his wife out for a spin, and you could do it. You could drive it anywhere, and
yeah,
let alone. And the other key for me is it's the best way to work out your kinks. Like, drive it to work
100%.
every day. Sometimes you might not get to work on time if you find an issue, but but that's how you become successful at drag and drive, is drive your car around.
Yeah.
You work out all that stuff, because the street is where so many people get. That's where we've lost so many cars at drag and drive events.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah, and it like I'm amazed, like, and more power to them, but the people that get their car together and they like, yeah, we drove around the block and put it on the trailer to show up for the race. That's, to me, that's like terrifying. Like, man, if I haven't worked out of the tool bag that I'm taking and driven my car for at least 2 weeks and several tanks of gas, which would be, 400 plus miles at least, I'm a little uncomfortable going, especially if I put new parts in or something like that. It's like, oh boy, I don't know if I'm ready. And I'm right with you. I tried to drive it. Clearly I didn't make it to Florida, but yeah, I'm right with you. The street is the ultimate leveling block for working out kinks, because if it won't make it on the street, good luck finishing a drag and drive.
Mm-hmm. Plus, it's like, that horrible feeling where you're like driving your daily commuter car and you're at a stoplight and some like hot rod pulls up and you're like, oh man, I wish I was in my race car right now, or
Dude,
something
100%.
way cooler than this.
100%. Or what else is crazy is like when you're driving like your daily and someone with bad brakes or something is behind you and you're like, what is that? What is that sound? Because you're just tuned into it and then you're like, whoo, that ain't my car.
Well, and the other piece for me is it's amazing the amount of reach that we all do have doing this. So, I had the pleasure of meeting Big Chief Justin Shearer at the one race week a couple of times. The first time he came up to the car and then I tried to make a pass and totally bombed it, because I was like, holy cow, he was just talking, and then it was all garbage after that. But so I was chatting with him after sick week, and he was like, watching you do what you do, he's like, I want to do a drag and drive event now. And I thought, that's pretty damn cool. Yeah. He's a pretty popular car guy, does a lot for the automotive enthusiasts, and he's watching me. And he's like, I want to do what you're doing. And so there was a couple of things that he messaged me on my phone, and it was like, that's pretty damn cool. He was like, how do you get that heavy MFer to go 890s with like 14 pounds of boost? I'm like, well, it was 870s. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool too. I think we're amazed at the amount of people in our car culture that are celebrities that actually watch the drag and drive stuff and are inspired by it and want to do it. So it'll be interesting to see if him and Jackie show up for one of these events, maybe incognito or something. I was going to give my orange helmet to wear so he, no one would know who he is.
Well, and it's you've got guys like Michael Narks doing, like, man, he's like religion. He puts the drag and drive podcast. It's like every day, and he's live. Every time I look at my phone, he's live. It's pretty awesome. Like,
yes.
And I think you have this advantage. Like, there's a lot of people like that come up to us, and I'm horrible with names. Like, I would ask everyone to please put on a name tag. But like, I know these people, but I'm horrible with names, and I feel so bad. But like, you're pretty good. I'm always like, hey, Rich, who's that guy? And sometimes you're like, I have no idea. but it's so flattering for sure. And I can't imagine, like, just with you doing this stuff and people like in these random cities across the country just know you. That's super cool. It's so flattering.
Yeah, a couple of stories from this trip. So the last time when I was coming to Oklahoma for King of the Open Road, I get to the border crossing, and the guy at the gate says, you got to stay right here. He's like, someone needs to see you. Not what you want to hear at a border crossing. And this big fella comes up. He's all tattooed up, and I kid you not, it was like he was a 14-year-old schoolboy. He's like, "Oh my God!" He's like, "This is the GTO from 1320 video," and like, I follow you all the time. And there's this great big lineup of people back there, and he's like, "I should pull you into secondary containment so I can check out your car." He's like, "I got a Chevelle," and blah blah blah. I was like, "That was pretty cool."
That is pretty
and
awesome.
So when I went to cross the border this time, there's a lady security guard there, and our border guard, and she's asking me the questions kind of in the monotone voice, and all of a sudden this dude like pushes her out of the way, and he's like, "Oh, you going to sick week, man?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he finally quits talking and he leaves, and she's like, "I totally forgot where I am." She's like, "Just go." And I'm like, "Good."
That's awesome.
And then on the way back, stopped in Tennessee for gas, and there was like three people at the event or three people that had been watching the event that were like, "Oh, congratulations on your win." This is in the middle of Tennessee, and I'm like, "That's pretty cool."
That is
So yeah,
awesome.
it reaches pretty far in the car community.
That's so awesome.
Yeah,
That's
I remember talking to you guys at Rocky Mountain Race Week. What was it, last year? And you're like, man, we've had this idea for this podcast for, I don't know, years, maybe a year or something like that. And you're like, we just need to get it off the ground. And I was like, oh my gosh, let me help you in any way that I can. And I remember both of you kind of being like, well, how many people are really going to listen to this thing? And like, well, I guess we'll find out, because you guys are much more influential than I think you are. So yeah, it's really cool.
Well, and I want to say thank you so much, Travis, for helping us with this, because if Rich and I did it, it would be like us using a corded dial phone, because like I don't know the technology piece and you make it like
A Motorola
seamless.
Razor, basically. That's
Dude,
how.
it's seriously like it is. We have the easy part of doing this, and you do all the editing and the production behind the scenes, and I really want to thank you because it's awesome.
Sure, yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yes, definitely appreciate all your work, Travis, and I'm glad to have you on, because every time we finish up with a guest and you turn the recording off, it's like, man, we should have had Travis on asking these questions. Pretty soon you won't need us, but
No, it's a blast. What a lot of people don't know is we record these on every Sunday, and it's kind of like it actually makes Mondays better. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like when I end my Sunday on this like high of like recording these things, I'm like, man, this is a lot of fun, and I go kind of into Monday with like a new swing of things. So yeah, it's really really fun.
yeah,
And
oh, go ahead, sorry.
and the lineup of guests that we
Oh,
have is really exciting too. I mean, like people that I've looked up to for years, like looked into like, man, I just wish that I knew like a fraction of what that person knows, and it's like we have all of those people in a list of guests. You know what I mean? So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, like I'd like to know what they forgot, because they forgot more than I'll ever know.
Right.
Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. I was talking to both Travis and Bill earlier about having Tony from AV Boys on, and if you don't know who that is, you should go look it up, because we're going to have Tony and Tess on our podcast. But Tony's pretty famous for street racing a Mustang, and he was racing a Porsche, and he was wheeling through the intersection, a stick shift Mustang, shifting gears in the air as he
On the
kicks this
street.
Porsche on
On
the
the street.
street. Yeah,
Yeah,
And,
and it was a built Porsche apparently.
and the
yeah.
Porsche had a head start.
Oh,
So
like a car. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I need to talk to him because my car does not work on no prep. Like it is a mess.
Yeah, so I'm super excited. Hopefully, we'll get those guys on next week sometime. But um, yeah, Michael Narks was the other one I wanted to add to that too. Yeah, thanks for all the work that he does. It's so cool to, I'll hit him up for information on the event that I was just at. Like, I'm pretty sure I have the only orange helmets in Canada. I think there was only three of us that were double winners. I think myself, Doc McIntyre, who also runs Mega Squirt MS3 Pro, and I'm not sure who the other one. It might have been one of the Dial Your Own or Street Freaks. But yeah, there's only three of us that were two-time winners, so I thought that was pretty cool. And I think I was 44th overall, which I was pretty proud of that too. I thought that was pretty cool to have a stick car that high up in the rankings. But the attrition was nasty this year. Like, out of the 25 stick cars, 12 broke. And I think out of the 350 that entered, I think like 90 cars didn't finish the trip. So
That's rough.
and
Yeah, that's rough.
yeah,
I wish we knew the data. Maybe we need to get a hold of Michael Narks. But was it the track prep? Was it the drive? Was it the heat? Was it the what was it?
it's a good question. I don't know actually. I don't know if it was just people pushing harder because the competition was stiffer, and maybe that's, no offense to Frank this time, because I know he's going to come and kick my ass. So I don't know. I don't know, because the heat wasn't as bad. Rocky Mountain Race Week is way harder. It's way more miles,
Way longer.
the
drives,
altitude,
way hotter. Yeah.
The altitude change.
yeah, maybe the track prep at some of them was sticky enough, but yeah, I mean, they've got converters. I got a clutch, and so you should have been able to figure that out about braking stuff. But
Totally. So, Rich, do you have any? I mean, your car is very well sorted, but do you have any changes planned?
no, I mean, it was funny because I was talking. Tony was harassing me while they were doing a live stream on YouTube. He's like, "When are you going to lighten that thing up?" And I mean, I really would love to. This is the second time I've taken the back seat out of my car and then ended up putting it back. And now I'm like, it's 50 pounds. I'm just going to leave that back seat back there. It looks nicer with it. And you never know when you're going to pick up a stray. So I think I'm just going to leave the back seat in it. I don't know. I don't know what I can do to lighten it up. And honestly, the car is only going to go 850s. So I've only got 0.25 left to go. And I don't think I need to lighten it up to do it. And just about anything that I would do would probably, like, I could go manual steering and manual brakes, and probably with the Hydro Boost and the power steering pump and all that stuff, probably lose 80 pounds there. But I am not going to do it because it drives and brakes so good.
I mean, you're running what, 14 pounds of boost now? It's like I feel like you've got a bit of room to grow there as well before you have to lighten things up and get rid of your comfort and all that.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced from the education I've got from this podcast that I could have turned up the boost earlier, launched harder, and knocked the 60 foot down some more, and then added the extra boost that I had available to me and ran 850s down there. The tracks were good enough. The air was fantastic. Couple of funny stories about that too. Like I wrote all that information down, and so the barometric pressure down there was like 101.4. Like it was like, and so from where I'm from, or from where Bill, like I'm about 90 kPa, and I think the worst I saw was at Bill's place. Actually, I think the worst was close when we went over Eisenhower Pass. It was like 67 kPa.
Yeah, it's like in the.
It was like, it's like there's no air here.
Yeah.
But the piece that's funny is when you pull the parachute down there, and it tries to, it's like the cartoon where your eyeballs go snap back in your head. It's like, holy cow, does the parachute ever hit hard?
Yeah,
like,
there's a lot more air for sure.
The air is so dense down there. But yeah.
Nice.
Go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to ask him one last question.
One question that I have is like, it's always a hot topic of like what makes a true street car. So I just want to know your opinion. What makes a true street car?
Yeah, for me, it's not like, it's got to be easy to get in and out of. So removable door bars for me. Like my 80-year-old dad actually climbed in the back seat while Blaine Stark drove, and I rode in the passenger seat. If your 80-year-old dad can hop in and go for a ride with you, and I don't know, do a couple 100 miles even, it's a pretty good indication. It's got to get good fuel economy. Maybe not good fuel economy, but it's got to have, you got to be able to relax while you're driving it, for me. Like if you're stressed the whole time you're driving it, you're driving your race car on the street. That's kind of how I think.
And what about, like, I agree with everything you said. One of those is pump gas. Like, I know the guys are on the 85, but dude, they have to sometimes go way out of their way to get gas. Man, if you can't put pump gas in it and go down the road, like, to me, that's a make or break.
Yeah. yeah, we don't have E85. You know, it's within 2 hours of me to go and get E85. So that's just not practical for me yet.
Yeah.
And I could probably run 87 octane if I wanted to. It's not a very high compression motor, but so yeah, I think that's what it is for me. If you are afraid to go and grab a carton of milk, yeah, it's not a street car in my mind, but
Right.
I think it's preference though. I mean, you know, like there's lots of different arguments there, but for me, mine was always a street car first. Like I built it, licensed it, drove it, knowing the whole time I was going to race it, but also knowing I don't want a truck and trailer because I don't want to trailer it because it's got wheels and they work really well.
That's
But
awesome.
there is one change that I think you were thinking of, because it had to do with Chad Fagley's car, how he ballooned up his radiator. I don't know if you guys saw that picture.
Oh,
So where's your coolant pressure sensor now, and where are you thinking of moving it?
yeah. So I'll touch on two things. One of them was Mike Finnegan and Tony D'Angelo when they made that 4-hour movie. If you haven't seen it yet, and it was basically on Mike's trip to Drag Week last year in Blasphemy. It's a great movie. It's a great production, I would say. I watched it once myself and then once with my dad. And you know what that show taught me was put some safeties in. If you have a fuel injection system and you don't have safeties in, you're asking for trouble. And honestly, this was the first year I've had safeties in. So I never had them in before. So I have a low oil pressure, I have a low fuel pressure, and I have a air fuel ratio safety. I know that above 5,000 RPM, my car should have 70 pounds oil pressure. So I put a safety in at 47 pounds, above 5,000 RPM, and I think above 80% throttle. And it caught me on the first one. I was a quart low in oil. It probably about the 1,000-foot mark. It shut me off, and it did exactly what it was supposed to. So that, I don't know that I would have hurt the engine, but it told me that I had an issue there. And so I do have a coolant pressure sensor in my car to answer your question. Right now, it's upstream of the thermostat. And yes, I still have a thermostat in my car because otherwise I'm going to freeze my ass off when I'm driving back in Canada. And so that was one of the changes. When I got there, I took the 180 thermostat out, put a 160 in, and then changed it back on the way home. But because lots of times you're in staging for a long time, the thermostat's not fully open. So I'm like warming my car up to get the thermostat open because I can see how much pressure is on the upstream side of the thermostat, but it doesn't really give you a good, like I'll see 54 pounds of pressure there, but that's not what's in the rad. That was more, not Chad, what was in Chad's rad was way more than that, like 70 pounds, he said. So yeah, I'm going to relocate it and try to find a place to put it on my on the tanks on my rad, just so that I have a better indication there. And then I probably will throw a safety in there too, so that I don't do it Chad did, because even though that was impressive, that looked expensive.
One thing about safeties that you have a great advantage of is you do know your car. I mean, extremely well. You have more seat time than about anybody, right? I can't count the number of races I've seen get thrown away because they'll hit like a safety of some kind that they didn't check beforehand, right? They're like, they have a boost safety set at like 28 pounds or something like that, and they go into the final round, and then they're like, okay, well, let's turn it up a bit, and they completely forget about their safeties. It seems like one big thing there is like, your checklist of things before you make a pass should include check your safeties, because it's like any changes that you're making to a car, I can't count the number of passes I've seen get thrown out the window because of incorrect safeties.
That's a super good point, Travis. Yeah.
And I think, Devin talked about this, I think, on one of his YouTube videos too, but also the data that you check after a pass, fuel pressure, oil pressure, rad coolant. Like, you should look at that every pass after you make one, just to make sure you get any early indication of something happening.
Yeah,
And
I
so
was
I'm
gonna.
trying to get more
Yeah,
diligent about that. But
yeah, and I, gleaned from one of his videos. I set up one of the pages on my data log as engine health, so I can flip to that and I can very quickly determine if everything's good or bad.
Mm.
We should have him on this podcast for
yeah,
sure.
we
He
totally
needs to
should.
be
Yeah.
put on the list.
Hmm.
Well, and how many times, like after that one event at Rocky Mountain Race Week, when you went back and started looking at your oil pressure after every pass, what'd you
Oh,
find?
oh, well, I hurt the motor on the last day. Yeah, that was, yes, that was a lesson learned because I never checked oil pressure. And at the end of the pass, it was dipping to zero and then it would slowly recover. And it wasn't until the last day when we were done heading to the hotel and there was a rod knocking. I was like, what is going on? And I drove it to the hotel as long as RPM was above idle, it was fine. But I had to trailer the car home, and that's when I put in the accumulator. I ditched the high volume oil pump, and made some changes, and I've had zero issues since then. And it's funny because the things that people think they have to have, like, oh, I got to feed two turbos and I got a 1,000 horsepower motor. I need a high volume oil pump. Yeah, I probably don't. but it's and it depends. Every setup's a little different. So yeah, it's interesting
Yeah,
for sure.
that was the other change I made after I hit that oil pressure safety. Um, my accumulator is controlled by my ECU, thanks to Bill, and so I used to only have it at 16 pounds it would dump. And so after that pass, I actually made it, because you can do a and or an or after
Yeah,
on Mega Squirt. I'm sure you can do it on Holly too. And so anytime I'm above 5,000 RPM, I just open the dump too. So if it needs to, it will take from the accumulator. And if it doesn't, it won't. But so in that case, it probably would have got me to the top of the track, because it was only like, half a second. And the accumulator probably would have supplied enough oil that it didn't hit the safety at that point. So that was another change. So I think that's another key, is learn from your mistakes and put something in place so the same thing doesn't happen again.
well, and if unlike our kids, they don't listen to us, but if we can learn from others, then we don't have to experience all that pain. So that's a good thing
Hmm.
Yeah, totally.
for sure. Well, so you've been on here as a co-host, but Travis, should we do the TKO round for Rich?
I think we should. So, Rich, we have this thing called the TKO round. Okay, all right, maybe you're familiar with it. So
He might know what we're talking about.
take it away, Bill.
So Rich, who has a pile of broken TKOs, you're very familiar. What first gear? What is the first car you owned or modified?
So my dad bought all the kids our first cars. Mine was a 77 Buick Skyhawk. And it was actually my aunt's car, and she had rolled the thing over, and we bought it from her, and we painted it in our attached garage at the house. Dad pretty much did most of the work, but yeah, we painted that one. Not a whole lot of. I mean, it was an automatic V6, but it was still my first car. It was, back then it was pretty cool. I would almost love to have it back and drop this combination in that car. Oh, 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 it would be good.
About 1,000 pounds lighter. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
Nice.
All right, we're gonna slam it in a second. What, in your opinion, has been the biggest technology change to move our sport forward?
Um, so as a guy who owned a carbureted tri-power GTO, I pretty much wore the screws out in that thing and made long trips, and literally would pull over on the side of the road and rip the carb apart to change the jets so it was running better, because I had an air fuel meter in the car. I would say fuel injection for me was it was a game changer. Like, I can't remember which video I was recently watching. Oh, it was Tony uh, on sick week, and how often he was ripping the carb apart and making changes. So much easier with fuel injection. And I think the other piece that doesn't get talked about a lot is a well set up carb is great, but I still think a fuel injection car doesn't wash the cylinder walls and keeps engines alive a whole lot longer because you're just not pouring fuel down them with a choke closed or so I think fuel injection.
All right. Palm shifted into third. If you could spend one day with someone, anyone, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you do?
So I don't know if I told this story or not, but did I tell a story about my grandpa when he got the first Harley Davidson
No.
in BC?
I don't even
No?
know this one.
Yeah, so my grandpa came over from Germany and then ended up working at an orchard. And somewhere along the way, he owned a Harley Davidson with a sidecar. And him and his buddy ran out of gas on the top of this pass. And so he sent his buddy for some gas. Well, his buddy brought back a bucket of gasoline. And so as they were trying to pour this gas from a bucket into this gas tank, they spilt it on the car and on the bike. And when they fired it up, the bike caught fire. So then they were throwing sand to put the fire out, which he's like, I know that wasn't a good idea. He had a heavy German accent, so I can't. And anyways, they get the fire out, but then now they got to drive this thing down. Well, the fire had burned the coil wire enough that it was arcing against the frame. So he said you'd be driving along and it would hit, it would just about knock you off the bike and so I would love to go back there and spend that day with my grandpa. He lived to 104, and even to go back there and listen to stories from when he was in Germany and decided that it was time to get the heck out of there. I think that would be a pretty cool day to spend with him. And just that whole sending somebody to get a bucket of gas. I mean, he didn't obviously send him to get a bucket, but that's all he had. So
I'm curious, when did your grandpa come over?
Um,
Pre-World War II or post?
Post, I think. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I have the news article from when he actually came over because he arrived in his lederhosen still, and it was like minus 40 C out in Ontario. So they wrote a story about him and they called him a vegetarian. He wasn't a vegetarian, but obviously there was a language barrier there. But my son actually found the article in the paper about that.
That's awesome.
Nice.
All right, Travis.
Yeah, we're going to pull it back into fourth. So what influences you to build your cars?
Definitely, they have to be streetable. It has to be something that you can drive all the time. So I would say if you ask me what the second biggest change for our sport would be, it would be overdrives. And so whether it's an automatic or a stick, I don't know why you drive an automatic. Don't know.
Because you have a beautiful purse that you want to show off. That would be why.
Exactly. The overdrive makes it key. It just, your sanity, your wallet is so much better with an overdrive. So yeah, streetability.
Earlier today I was thinking randomly about I think it was in the Rocky Mountain Race Weekers group. They were talking about theft at the hotels or whatever. And a lot of people were like, I've been very lucky over the years where I've never had anything stolen, and I just have stuff laying out in the open in these hotel parking lots. And I think a lot of that has to do with how people trickle into the hotel throughout the night. Like, to paint the picture for people that haven't been there, the first people to arrive are Bill and Rich because they go 100 miles an hour on the street. They make their pass. They're flying down the street. They get to the hotel in time to enjoy some pops and sodies. And then trickling out through the next 10 hours or so, you have varying degrees of cars, and rolling in at about 3 or 4 a.m. are people who had to change things, or those folks that have power glides or things like that. So I think it's kind of hard to dodge all the cars coming into the hotel parking lots and actually steal anything. So yeah, overdrives are pretty awesome.
And I have to say, I love your fantasy of me and Rich being the first ones there. That's awesome. I
Yeah.
like that. Okay, so Rich mentioned overdrive, so we're gonna slap it into fifth. Rich, what in your opinion is the secret to stick shift racing?
Clutch management.
Nice.
It really is. Like that was the difference this year compared to all the other years. I mean, you don't break stuff. It's the only way to be consistent. I mean, I ranged from my quickest was 875 and my slowest was 891, and that was only because I let off early. So it's I think that's a pretty tight grouping for a stick car.
Well,
And
I think
it's all about clutch management, whether it's with the bank shift Billy or whether it's with an adjustable clutch. Somehow you have to slip that sucker.
so. On yours, I know you let off early, but maybe the better representation would be your range of 60 foots in the 6 passes.
Yeah. And so the best one was 141 at Bradenton, and that was the highest launch RPM. The rest of the time I backed it back down to like 4,300 RPM, and they were all like 145 to 147.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
When did you switch over to an adjustable clutch?
It was after the Pro Charger. I was actually looking at that, trying to figure out exactly when it was.
Thinking it was 19, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it was 19. Yeah.
And before that, what were you running, like an RXT or something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, and then it was a fine dance of tire pressure, high RPM launches, and the funny part is my car is 60 footing really well right now, but you don't get any cool pictures. Like back then, everyone would snap the pictures, but it looked a lot like wah, but during that, the wheels were in the air, so it was like, yeah, look good, cool pictures. But then it fell on its face just about every time. So
yeah, I mean, on the internet, you see a lot of debate about things like this, like adjustable clutches or like a device like Bill's or anything like that, where it's like, oh, you're cheating, why don't you drive it like a man or whatever. And it's like, well,
God.
that's super easy to say when you have like a 400, 500, 600 horsepower vehicle that weighs like 3,200 pounds. It's much different than a 4,000-pound vehicle that makes 1,500 horsepower before, I don't know what your stump puller makes, Rich, but it's like before 5,000 RPM or something, or 6,000 RPM, you're making a ton of torque, right? So your ability to slip that with your left foot becomes impossible. Well, not impossible.
It's non-repeatable.
To run a 141 to a 145 60 foot all week just wouldn't be possible.
Well, you don't have enough time for passes. Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the consistency is like I know this clutch well enough to that's why I'm confident that I can make the radials work up here, because I know I can hit the tires soft enough. Where good luck trying to do that with the right pressure. I mean, especially at a 4,100-pound car. Because even though I wrote my time on every time slip, I always drain my water when I'm packing my parachute. So I usually drain in like 2 gallons of fuel off, which is about 16 pounds of weight before I ever drove over the scales. I didn't want to break the scales, so I had to lighten the load a little bit.
Nice. Travis, you want to take it into 6th gear?
Yes, let's do it. So what advice would you give to someone that's just now getting into this sport?
Pick our brains. Like CJ Roberts is a good one. He sent me a couple of time slips today, and he went 9.0 at 150 miles an hour. And so I was giving him some advice there. But talk to people if you can talk to people before you start the build and do it the first time, you'll save yourself a lot. Like, try to learn from our mistakes. Like, we will tell you, I personally want as many fast stick cars out there as possible. There's a ton of great information even on these podcasts. Go back and listen to them. I think there is. I think other guests have said the same thing. Like, don't hesitate to reach out to anybody. I've had lots of people just about daily. I've got somebody, messaging me, is it okay if I ask you some questions? I'm like, absolutely. Like, fire away. It'll help you in the long run and save you from buying parts 2 and 3 times and having a stack of clutches like I have in my garage.
So Facebook Messenger or carrier pigeon's the best way to get hold of you?
Actually, dog sled teams in Canada.
Got it. Right.
Perfect. Well, Rich, co-host, thank you so much. And thanks for winning and being so famous so we could actually interview you. And thanks, Travis, for actually coming on camera. This is great. You have double work now because now you got to go back and edit all this out and put in pictures.
Yep.
But I do want to have a huge thanks to Stick Shift Nation, which is Travis Foster, for hosting this podcast. And, of course, you can find Clutch Burners on 10 different platforms, some video. The other ones are mostly audio. And if you'd like to see this podcast continue to grow and more, well, subscribe and do all the bell ringy dingy thingy. But also get yourself a Stick Shift Nation shirt, hat, or sticker. It'd be kind of cool to see some of those when we go places. Yeah, that's it. You got anything, Travis?
No, I think that's it.
All right.
Yeah, it's you can find me at Guido Rich on Instagram and Rich Guido on Facebook, and I got a YouTube channel too. If you search my name, I'm sure you'll find it. There's not a lot on there yet, but I'm not sure how many YouTubers I can fool to riding with me, so I might have to start making some on my own. But anyways, yes.
That's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I guess I could plug, not that it matters, but I've got a Instagram is V8Billy, and then I have a second Instagram at bankshiftbilly.com if you're interested in clutch control stuff. But yeah, this is awesome. Thank you both. And I guess we're out of here. Yes, Travis?
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Yep.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Over and out. Bye.